This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn Mac Cumhaill and Deirdre of the Sorrows Grawn your wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the trooping and solitary, and close to are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka fireside, the Marrow fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore and mythology, we retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, the culture and the history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. O'Lahan. I'm your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 174 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we have our next tale from the saga of the Battle of Ventry. This is Ventry Part 3, The Prince of Ulster. But before that, a big welcome to any new and indeed any returning listeners. Thank you so much for your recent or long-running support. If you have not done so already, please follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Those are the two best places to get in touch if you have any queries, thoughts, or if you just want to say hello. The other ways you can support this podcast are, of course, you can join Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com, where for as little as €5 a month, although you can pay more if you want, you can gain access to bonus material, not just for Fireside, but for all of the podcasts on the Headstuff Podcast Network, and there are more of them every month or two. The podcast network continues to grow each and every month, and as I can take at this point to say, and that the Irish Podcast Awards are happening at the moment, or the submissions have taken place, and this has been the first year that Headstuff have encouraged Fireside to be entered into the submission. So we've been entered into the long list now, and thank you. Basically, just wanted to thank you for your support already. It's a great thing to even at this third year, halfway through this third year of this podcast, to be submitting for something like the Podcast Awards, because everything like that is just more chance for Fireside to be listened to by more people and to just spread the name of it further and further. So it was another good thing to take part in. So we'll see what happens there. I'll keep in touch with you all about that as that plays out. If not on Headstuff Plus, you can buy my book Garden Sea in paperback from the Headstuff website, or from Kindle, in Kindle form from Amazon.com. Links are all in the description below. Also in the description below is the link to our source for this week's tale. And this week's tale is the next story from the Battle of Ventry. You can see the source I'm mainly adapting it from in the link below if you want to have a read of it. It's from a book that I've only ever been able to find in this online PDF version, but I'm delighted I have, because there's a few stories in it, a few Fionn tales that we haven't covered so far, so it could be a further use after the adaptation of the Battle of Ventry is complete. But it's a really, really great collection, and a comprehensive version of the Battle of Ventry was something I had struggled to find, so I was very, very grateful to find this version. Breaking a big story down into individual episodes is a challenge, certainly considering I like these episodes to be able to listen to out of order, or if you haven't listened to for a long time, that you'll be able to check back in. I would like it, as always, to be rewarding for those who have listened to all of them, and I hope there's more that you can discover each time. But considering the Battle of Ventry is one story that I was breaking into 4 episodes, I wanted it to seem like there were 4 self-contained tales that were a part of a bigger narrative. And it didn't initially split as equally or evenly as say the life of Granuaile did, the last thing that we were adapting, and that was an even bigger challenge, as that was history I was dealing with. So you can't go off on your own in any way there, or else unless you're intentionally wanting to deceive people, which I do not want to do. But the Táin was a similar situation. The Táin is one big story that I dedicated 6 episodes to in the very first year, or towards the very end of the very first year of Fireside. Maybe at the start of year 2, I think it was around episode 50, that we started looking at the Ulster cycle. So that was that was my first big challenge of trying to divide a bigger tale into individual stories. But the more I've adapted, and I'm glad I've split this story into 4, it's taken some rearranging of things mentioned from earlier episodes. Case in point with the episode on the King of France last week with Oisin and Osgar. A lot of that preamble about the King of France is from the very first part of the Battle of Ventry in the version I'm adapting from, but it made it more of a complete narrative in Oisin and Oscar's story for last week, or the week before last, to bookmark the King of France throughout that story and throughout that episode. It just kind of was a nice little bow to tie it in. As is this now, because we will get down to the story now and not dilly-dally and talk anymore. But we'll talk more about this afterwards, of course. But this is Ventry 3, The Prince of Ulster on Fireside. Ventry 3, The Prince of Ulster. The warriors of the Fianna and their leader Fionn Mac Cumhaill were engaged in a long and bloody battle with the armies of Dara Dun, the king of the world. Both sides had suffered heavy losses, and the sands of Ventry harbour were stained with blood. After another day of fighting, Fionn Mac Cumhaill asked his warriors, "Who among you will guard the harbour overnight against the armies of Dara Dun?" "I will," said the collective voices of Oisin and Osgar, Fionn Mac Cumhaill's respective son and grandson. Both Oscar and Oisin had already been heavily involved in the fight at Ventry, and their recent defeat of the King of France had left them both cut and bleeding. "Let our wounds be tended now," said Oscar, "and tonight we will defend the Fianna again." That night, the father and son team of Oisin and Oscar, together with a horde of warriors of Clan Boscana of the Fianna, served as sentries on Ventry Strand. Good thing, too, because 8 sons of Dollar Durha, the champion of the King of the World, came to shore with 1,600 strong men. Steel and blood glistened in the moonlight until the dawn sky was as red as the sea foam, and all that was left from either side was Oisin, Oscar, and 3 of the sons of Dollar Durha. Oscar took on 2 of the remaining foes, and his father took on the final one. Oscar was the mightiest warrior of the Fianna, second only to his grandfather Fionn Mac Cumhaill, but he was severely wounded and exhausted, and the sons of Dollar Durha began to stab Oscar in his open wounds. When the grandson of Fionn Mac Cumhaill realised how close he was to death, he mustered the last of his strength and courage and cut the heads off his 2 enemies before collapsing into the ebbing tide. Oscar just about pulled himself onto the sand before he passed out. Oisin was not the fighter his son was, but he was still a warrior of the Fianna, and he fought the final son of Dollar Durha bravely. However, Oisin too was dangerously cut up and began to lose his footing and the fight. When Fionn Mac Cumhaill saw his only son losing the battle, he had his bard call to Oisin, "Son of Fionn Mac Cumhaill, think of all the kings and queens, the chieftains, men and women and children, all those who have fought and died in this battle. Do not count yourself among their numbers. Rise to fight another day for the Fianna. Rise to tell the story of this day." Oisin had fallen into the shallows of the shore, and while he could not find the strength to stand, he pulled his foe into the water. Oisin wrestled his way on top of the final son of Dollar Durha and drowned him in the Kerry waters. Oisin then dragged the body back to the shore and cut the head off it for good measure. Oisin then crawled back to the beach to check on his son Oscar. Together they were both carried by their kinsmen to rest and to be healed. At the very moment when the last of his sons had been beheaded, and the two-man team of Oisin and Oscar had been temporarily disposed, Dollar Durha, the champion of the King of the World, came to shore and made a challenge to the Fianna. "Send me 100 of your best men, and I will slay them all single-handed." This was a lofty claim, but Dollar Durha had been named by Dara Dunn to be the only one of all the kings and champions in his armies to be capable of defeating Fionn and the Fianna, and he would do it alone. Fionn sent 50 men from Clan Boskna and 50 men from Clan Morna of the Fianna, and that evening 100 Fenian heads were returned to camp, all by the sword of Dollar Durha. The next day, another 100 warriors said goodbye to their loved ones, knowing that they would not survive the day's fight. And regrettably, they did not. For 6 consecutive days, the champion of the King of the World slew 100 men of the Fianna a day. Each day after the battle, Dollar Durha would take a hurley and a sliotar and keep the ball in the air for hours until another consecutive record had been set. This was to further taunt the Fianna. From his sickbed, Oscar wanted to arise. "I can beat his hurling record," he cried. "No," said Fionn Mac Cumhaill. "Even that exceeds your considerable talents. Only 2 are known to have that skill in hurling. Lú Lá of the Tuatha De Danann and Cuchulainn of Marhevna." But with the mention of Cuchulainn's name, while hope at Ventry began to dwindle, word began to spread all over Éire of the battle against the King of the World, and an answer came in the hound's home of the northern province of Ulster. The elderly King of Ulster received word of the Battle of Ventry. He told his messenger, "Never have I more lamented my advancing years. There's nothing I would love more than to ride to Kerry and fight with Fionn Mac Cumhaill and the Fianna. But I'm too weak, and I am needed here." Then the king's young son said, "Let me go and like the young Cuchulainn fight for Ulster. My son, of all the 13-year-old boys one could send into battle, you would be the finest warrior. But this is not yet your time." But the king knew his son. He knew the prince would still try to go and fight at Ventry. So the King of Ulster had 12 protectors to keep the prince in a tower. Once locked inside, the prince said to his fosterers, "My friends, if you come with me to fight at Ventry, you will still be honouring my father by remaining by my side. And you will also let me make my claim to join the ranks of the Hound of Ulster and the Children of Ishnach, who only earned their legends through heroic deeds." The prince's keepers were moved and convinced by the youth's words. They agreed to sneak the prince out and make their way to Ventry. Dollar Durha had slain his 600th of the Fianna by the time the Prince of Ulster arrived with them. The youth approached Fionn Mac Cumhaill and said, "I am the Prince of Ulster, and I have come to fight with the Fianna in the name of Éire." "You are a child, boy," said Conan Mac of Clan Morna, "and the brute on the beach has just killed 600 of the best of our men. What possible help could you be?" "Well, I do know one thing," said the prince. "I've never before tonight met a member of the Fianna, but I know who you all are from the stories, and I can tell by your boorish doubt that you are Conan Mac of Clan Morna." Conan Mac was not impressed by this smart response, but they were both interrupted by the marauder on the beach, who called for another 100 of the Fianna's best men. Fionn Mac Cumhaill said, "I know your father the king, and I know he would not want his only son to die this day. I thank you for your courage and your aid, but I will not allow you to fight today." While Cuilche MacRonan and 300 of Clan Baskna attempted to stop the Prince of Ulster from going to fight, the 12 keepers were the only ones to charge into battle, as the prince continued to plead his case. One by one, the 12 protectors were cut down by Dollar Durha, but fighting as they were for their prince, their king, their province, and their country, these dozen defenders fought and died as valiantly as any man of the Fianna. When the Prince of Ulster heard that his 12 protectors had fallen, he fell into a battle fury, comparable only to the Hound of Ulster. When the Prince of Ulster heard that his 12 protectors had fallen, he fell into a battle fury, comparable only to the Hound of Ulster himself. Fionn Mac Cumhaill knew well that there would be no way to stop the prince from fighting now, and he gave the youth his blessing. When Dollar Durha and the armies of the monarch of the world saw the Prince of Ulster charging towards them on his own, they all began to laugh. This champion had already slain 612 of the finest of the Fianna, and now one child was what they sent. They thought they surely had Fionn Mac Cumhaill on the ropes, but despite the laughter, the Prince of Ulster was not distracted or discouraged. He charged at Dollar Durha, and before the champion had a chance to defend himself, the prince dug several deep wounds into his foe's flesh. Dollar Durha stopped laughing and decided to cut this child into tiny bits. No one had lasted longer than a quarter of an hour against him, but he would chew this child like a dog toy. But the prince was unlike any fighter of the Fianna. He fought with the honour and the pride of every Fenian warrior, but with a youthful skill that bested Dollar Durha's size and strength. Soon the champion knew he had met his match. The two clashed swords and spear from morning until night, from low tide to high and back again. Eventually the two grappled on the shore, determined to submerge their foe. But at last the tide came back in, and both fighters were too weak to win and too proud to submit. Both Dollar Durha and the Prince of Ulster were swept out to sea and drowned. The Fianna celebrated the defeat of so powerful an enemy, but lamented the loss of a 13-year-old boy, the first one to arrive with outside aid. But now Éire knew of the Battle of Ventry, and Fionn Mac Cumhaill had still yet to fight. To be continued.
Hi, I'm Niamh Kavanagh.
And I'm Gearóid Farrelly.
And we are the hosts of Agony Rants. We have been friends for a long time, and on Agony Rants, we do what we've always done.
Talk about people behind their backs and make suggestions on how they can improve their lives.
No, we cheer them up on Monday morning and help them with their problems.
By meddling in areas in which we are dangerously unqualified.
Why don't you join us each week for a new episode?
You'll find us wherever you do your listening with special bonus content for subscribers on headstuffpodcasts.com. Agony Rants, out now on the Headstuff Podcast Network.
And that's Ventry 3, the Prince of Ulster on Fireside, and I hope you enjoyed it. This is fun for a number of reasons. First off, out the bat, with the title of it, with Ulster, we get to ride with Cuchulainn on our shoulders again. I'd said what a treat it's been to be handling characters like Fionn and Oisin and Osgar again, to be going right back to the roots of Fireside, the roots of Irish mythology, the real bread and butter. And now to have an episode that has Cuchulainn in the shadows, even with Lulav Oda mentioned as well, of this young previously unknown Prince of Ulster who gets his moment in the sun here against this Goliath-esque figure such as Dollar Durha. I stuck quite closely for a lot of this. There's two significant changes. One major change I think I made to the main version I've been adapting this from. And that's when when Oisin and Osgar, fresh from their fight against the King of France, when they're determined to still defend the Battle of Ventry overnight, and they face off against these 8 sons and these 1,600 strong men. The 8 sons are from this other king, this other champion who is not mentioned again. It's a similar case with some of the kings that fight and some of the heroes. Perhaps once upon a time these were more known names, or perhaps they're more names, they're known names that have escaped me. Perhaps it's my ignorance, but for the sake of the storytelling, where I can try and streamline it and combine things to give it a sense of a better flow and make it the best version of the story that I can tell, it seemed to lose nothing but gain something to make the 8 sons the sons of Dalar Durha, who is this champion of the King of the World, because he comes out of nowhere and becomes this person to kill 100 men of the Fianna every day. So I liked the idea of giving him a bit of a stake, with the 8 sons that face off against Oisin and Osgar being his children, and then the 8 sons, the fighting of and defeating of the 8 sons being what takes Oisin and Osgar out of the fight. Because there's another, with the structure of this, which is just person fights and person dies or wins, and if they win they recede into the background. It's nice when there's cases where there's a reason, if I can ascertain a reason why the person isn't fighting if they have won. So with Oisin and Osgar, they had their fight, like other people in the Fianna had their fight and won, but they were determined to keep going. But now we know they actually are indisposed, at least for the moment. There's a reason why they can't fight. And we have then the Prince of Ulster coming down and mentioning and wanting to ride, him being the first one other than the Fianna, because this has become such a big fight that it's hard to remember that no one else knows that this is happening. No one else knows that the country is under invasion. It's just Fionn Mac Cumhaill, but now word has spread, and Ulster has been the first one to send aid to Fionn on Ventry. The other of the 2 changes, this is quite minor, but I suppose I might as well talk about it because it's a nice detail, I think, is these 12 protectors for the Prince of Ulster, who the King of Ulster, the Prince's father, assigns to protect his son and to stop him from going to Ventry. And the Prince basically finds this loophole that says, look, just stick with me. You're still protecting me, so you're honouring my father, but then I get to go and fight and potentially join the ranks of Cuchulainn and the children of Ishnach, of Nisha and all the boys, which I can only do if I fight. And so these 12 guys go with him, or 12 people, it doesn't specify, and they go with him. And while the Prince of Ulster is arguing with Fionn Mac Cumhaill and Conan Whale about whether or not he can join the fight at all, these 12 protectors then fight Dalar Durha. And I liked the idea of that they were fighting for their king and their prince, and the whole thing that they fought with a great valiance is valiance a word? But with a great vigor and honor and prowess. And that's the version I went with here. But in the version I was adapting, it said that Dalar Durha massacred them easier than any other foe. So I liked to give these dozen protectors, these fosterers, their moment in the sun before their untimely demise. And we also then get the final, considering there's so many of these fights in this battle, is just fight, there's a bit of wet, there's a bit of sand, there's a bit of blood, always ends with the head being cut off. We've had characters drown before, and they've nearly drowned, but we have this David and Goliath fight between this 13-year-old Prince of Ulster and this monstrous person, Dalar Durha, who has killed 612 of the Fianna at this point, and that they by the end, they've no weapons left, they've no energy left, they're just grappling there in the shore. They're so weak from the fight that the tide coming in and going back out sweeps them out with them, but both of them still have enough strength of body and spirit to not submit to the other, that the two of them go down with each other. And I think that's a great, really solid and different kind of ending to the previous fights we've seen in the Battle of Ulster. And so that is 3 out of 4 down. We've now got one more fight to go. We still have yet to see the King of the World himself, Dara Dunn, in battle. And also, He may be older, he may be the general on the battle lines, but it's still Fionn Mac Cumhaill. He is still the reason this whole fight was going on, because the monarch of the world said, I'll never be the king of the world as long as Éire has Fionn Mac Cumhaill. As long as Fionn Mac Cumhaill is alive, I'll never be the king of the world. And he hasn't fought Fionn Mac Cumhaill yet. So it's all still to play for. It's all still on the cards. And that'll be the fourth and final part of the Ventry saga, which will be week after next. Next week, we have another great folktale called The King of Ireland's Son, a kind of almost Dr. Seussy kind of rattling boggy kind of building kind of tale. Really fairy focused. It was a real fun one to adapt. Had a great sense of rhythm and play to it. I'm looking forward to sharing with you. So thank you all for listening. I'm still recording from Australia. I'm actually recording from my dressing room in Cairns. We're in the beautiful Cairns Performing Arts Centre. This is our second show of 2 this week here in Cairns. We have a little bit of a break then before we head down to Tasmania and make our way around Victoria. And we're here with the World of Musicals until the beginning of August, at which point I head back to Ireland. So I'll still be here for a while. Still very happily recording away and keeping ahead of things. So if you have not done so already, please do follow me over on Instagram at firesidebard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Subscribe to Headstuff Plus at headstuffpodcast.com. Buy my book Garden Sea in paperback or in Kindle version. The paperback can deliver all around the world, and thank you so much to all of those who continue to buy it. I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. Remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Headstuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.